From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, a podcast that uncovers stories about the Bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode,
I think there's a lot of different factors for the motivation in having someone like me come out and take pictures. It's preserving the history and preserving the culture. I mean, I've taken pictures of people whose families asked me to go out with them and shoot pictures because they know that their grandfather is the last in that family who's going to be working on the water.
I don't know when you're listening to this, but chances are, if there's even a hint of daylight over the Chesapeake Bay at this instant, then Jay Fleming is probably out on the water. His left eye is squinting into the viewfinder of a Nikon camera. The camera's field of vision is expertly trained on a man in weathered overalls and waterproof boots. Maybe the man is hoisting a crab pot, dripping with slightly salty water, onto the deck of his boat. Or maybe this waterman has just dredged up a fresh batch of oysters. Or it's a rare moment of repose, the man's eyes scanning the horizon in search of his next shot at the Chesapeake Bay's living bounty. For centuries, America's largest estuary has filled people's plates with crabs and oysters and put money in the wallets of people working the water. But this way of life is more endangered than ever. The threats are many: tight competition from foreign and domestic markets, the rising cost of fuel and supplies, the fading interest by each successive generation to join the family business. As skipjacks and dead-rise boats disappear from the horizon, history slips away. But, in a sense, it can be frozen in time. Welcome to Season 3 of Chesapeake Uncharted. This time, our team here at the Bay Journal is interested in hearing from a younger generation of Bay leaders, the people who weren't born when the Chesapeake Bay cleanup formally began 40 years ago. With the Bay restoration effort facing its current set of cleanup goals in 2025, this felt like a good time to go searching for some inspiration. Each episode spotlights one of these wave makers. Today, our guest is Jay Fleming. Fleming has dedicated his life to visually documenting the Chesapeake Bay's seafood industry. He has compiled these photographs into a pair of books. There was 2016's Working the Water, which depicted all facets of life connected to seafood's labors. The second was 2021's Island Life, which brought together 10 years of images from his trips to Tangier Island and Smith Island, the Bay's only two inhabited offshore islands. Fleming's work also has been seen on display at countless gallery exhibits across the region and gracing the walls of prominent places of business. Talking about photography may be a bit like dancing about architecture, but I think you'll find our conversation worth a listen, starting shortly after this quick break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Hello again. On today's episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're listening to my interview with Jay Fleming. It would be tempting to call Jay's career path a foregone conclusion. His mother is a high-placed official with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and his father is a former National Geographic staff photographer. But Fleming took a somewhat circuitous route toward becoming one of the top nature photographers in the Bay region. He graduated from St. Mary's College in Maryland with a degree in economics. He worked briefly at his mother's agency, the Maryland DNR, before setting off out west for Yellowstone National Park. There he worked with the National Park Service on helping eradicate invasive lake trout. Back in Maryland after that stint, Fleming worked for Maryland's seafood marketing program in the early 2010s. Eventually, his own photography projects began taking center stage, and now, 36 years old, he still hasn't looked back. Fleming supplements his own photography work with freelance assignments for glossy publications such as Angler's Journal, Baltimore Magazine, and Delaware Beach Life. And if you want to learn the tricks of the trade yourself, he also offers photography workshops set in some of the Bay region's most picturesque locations. He's expanded internationally in recent years, too. He had just recently returned from a 10-day trip to the Galapagos when we met at his office/workshop/gallery. Perched on Kent Island, just steps away from the Chesapeake Bay, Fleming's space is festooned with framed photographs he has taken and mementos from his adventures. This includes one of the finest collections of Chesapeake Bay oyster cans you will ever see. We talked about how this body of water turned into his body of work, and I was interested to get his perspective on what he thinks would help improve the health of the Bay's ecosystem. So off we go. Well, Jay Fleming, how are you doing?
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks for coming on today. Where are we here?
So we are sitting at my studio, which is on the top floor of a warehouse on Kent Island, right near Chesapeake State Park. So this is a space where I produce my prints, have events, and it's kind of like a gallery with all my work on the walls.
This is the eastern shore of Maryland, so you have the requisite decoys as well, some Canada geese.
Yeah, I have a lot of old decoys. My dad was a big decoy collector back in the 70s when people were like using them for firewood. So he collected decoys at a time where decoys weren't really seen as like valuable antiques. I mean, a lot of these decoys are old, like working decoys. So they're actually functional decoys that people would use to lure in ducks and geese. There's a lot of stuff here that's like that I've just collected over the years. And like oyster cans. I've got a whole shelf of oyster cans you can see behind you.
There's a story behind them there, right? That we used to have so many oyster processing houses around here. A lot of these names no longer exist.
Yeah. I think out of all...
bittersweet to look at.
Exactly. I think out of all the oyster cans that I have, which is probably hundreds, I think only 2 of the actual cans are from places that are still in business.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, we have the seafood industry that we have here today on the Chesapeake Bay is a small fraction of what it was at one point in time. And that's, the oyster cans are reflective of that.
Well, so in terms of photographers associated with the Chesapeake Bay, obviously here at the Chesapeake Bay Journal, I got to give props to Dave Harp. And then I'd say you're right there. How did you end up pursuing this very regional, very specific art of choice?
Well, I grew up in a photography family. My dad was a photographer. He basically shot for about 50 years. He worked for National Geographic. He worked freelance. He's published books. So I grew up in that environment.
Kevin Fleming.
Kevin Fleming, correct. So Kevin, my dad, was over in Delaware, and we would always go out shooting together on a regular basis. Like, it was just something I would tag along with him on. And I had his old hand-me-down gear. I had an old Nikon film camera and, slide film that he would have, and he would get processed for me. But we got together, and it got to a point where we got really competitive when I was like 15 years old. So I was young. He had already been shooting for National Geographic for a long time, and, got competitive and got to the point where like sometimes I was actually shooting better pictures than him, which bothered him. But, we still enjoyed it. And then it got to a point when after I graduated college, that I wanted to kind of branch out and do my own thing. Mm-hmm. So he's in Delaware. I was born and raised in Annapolis, so I would always go there for the summers. And at a certain point, I realized I needed to find my own territory. And, I had grown up on the bay, fishing and crabbing, kayaking, all that. And I never really focused on the bay and the issues surrounding the bay with my photography until I came back. Mm-hmm. And that's when I kind of took a deep dive into what was going on in the bay.
Well, I've had it in a different life. I had the opportunity to interview your dad. I think he was opening a new gallery or something. And I mean, he has a harrowing story about surviving being right next to the Egyptian president?
Anwar Sadat.
Yeah. So you almost wouldn't have been here, maybe. I don't know if you were born then or after.
That was in 1981 when he was on assignment for National Geographic. And he was basically shadowing Anwar Sadat, who was the Egyptian president. And this was at a time when Jimmy Carter was trying to make peace in the Middle East. And apparently people weren't into that. And while he was shadowing Anwar Sadat, there was a group of assassins that essentially murdered him during a speech, and 5 other people that were there with my dad. And my dad, he claims to have grenade shrapnel somewhere in his leg or something. I don't know, but he's got all kinds of wild stories. Mm-hmm. But he survived, and he got the only pictures from that day, and that set his career off as a photographer because he was in the wrong place at the right time.
Well, now that we've talked about the risk, the other side is you're obviously in love with the Chesapeake Bay. Where do you think that comes from?
I think just growing up in Annapolis and just growing up crabbing and fishing and kayaking and spending time on the water, mm-hmm. and being naturally curious about what's happening in the bay. My mom works for Maryland DNR. She used to work in fisheries. Now she works in waterway improvement. But when my brother and I were young, she would get us involved with all kinds of volunteer opportunities. I mean, we would go out and we'd go out on striped bass, spawning surveys in the Upper Bay when DNR was gill netting up there. And
what age are we talking about here?
We were 13, 14.
Okay.
So we were right there with the biologists, working and helping. And
doing what?
Cutting open fish. We were, helping tag fish, doing all kinds of stuff. I mean,
literally getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, and we loved it.
You seem to have taken that to heart. You went to work for the state afterward, DNR?
I worked for the state of Maryland, DNR, right here out of Chesapeake, which is less than a mile from where we're sitting today.
Chesapeake State Park?
Yep, Chesapeake State Park, doing shad and sturgeon restoration. And then I worked for the National Park Service in Yellowstone in their fisheries program, doing non-native species eradication with lake trout. And then I went to work for the Maryland Seafood Marketing Program. Mm-hmm. And that is really the job that showed me the value that photography could have for other businesses, and also showed me the value of photography as a storytelling tool.
So your photography training is the School of Hard Knocks, being at your father's elbow. Did you ever take any formal classes or training in photography?
Nope. I took AP studio art in high school, and I did photography of that, of course. Mm-hmm. But other than that, no formal training, just learning on your own and learning by mistake.
Let's be clear here. You don't just make your money by taking a picture, selling the picture. You have many different streams. So can you kind of give us an overview of how this all works?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key with any business is diversity in terms of streams of revenue. So I've started doing, I do prints, obviously, my work, my fine art prints that I produce here in my studio. I've got 2 books that I produced and published.
Yep. So working on the water and
working the water Island Life. Okay. So both very Chesapeake Bay focused books.
Okay.
So I've got the 2 books that Working the Water was published in 2016. Island Life was 2021, and those books continue to sell today.
And then you work to train people as well, leading workshops.
Correct. So another part of my business, which has turned into a pretty significant part of my business, is the photography workshops. So I basically started these in 2015, Kind of by accident, really. A woman from DC who's part of a camera club over there, she called me and asked if I did workshops. And I basically was like, what's a workshop?
Now I do, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like a photography guide and a coach in a way. And
how big is the group that you would take out?
the first group that I took out was 2 people.
Okay.
And I think I charged them, I don't even want to say, because it was like nothing. I was just happy to do it. Like, I was just eager to do it. And took them out to Smith Island, which was a perfect place because there's all the watermen that work out there, the culture that people can photograph, the landscapes, the pelicans, the egrets, the herons. There's a lot of different things to photograph on Smith Island. So Smith Island was the most logical place for me to take somebody. These 2 women had a great time, and the next year I took like 3 groups out. And then it kept growing and growing, and then I had a boat built for the workshops, like a 22-foot center console that could navigate the shallow waters around Smith Island, but also could carry up to 6 people, which is what my captain's license allows me to carry.
I think the main reason I wanted to talk to you was, as someone who also tries to document life on the Chesapeake Bay, I don't know of anyone who has been as successful as you in working your way into the waterman culture. And I'm wondering, how did that kind of go about, and how were you able to kind of win that trust?
Well, I've always been a big proponent of local seafood, promoting local seafood and promoting Maryland seafood, and then just Chesapeake Bay seafood and domestic seafood in general has been a way for me to get in with the seafood industry. What I do is an incredibly valuable marketing tool for the seafood industry. You know, I'm just doing it on my own. Like, it's stuff that I want to do anyway, but it's building value for what the watermen and the fishermen up and down the East Coast are doing. It's like, you know, it's bridging the gap between the seafood harvesters, the seafood processors, and then the consumer. So it's educating people as to where the product's coming from, the process by which, you know, it's being brought to shore, and also the people who are involved with it.
So, like, you call up a waterman, like, hey, can I hop on your boat with you at 5 a.m., that kind of thing?
I mean, pretty much, yeah. There's a little more to it than that, but, you know, finding the right boat to get on, finding the right people to get out with who, you know, not only are following the rules, because nobody who's, you know, people who aren't following the rules or who aren't necessarily doing things right, they're not going to want to be photographed. But, you know, there's a lot of people who are eager and who understand the value of what I'm doing to, you know, that want to be photographed.
Yeah, tell me about that first book, Working the Water. What was the genesis of that idea?
So that idea of documenting the whole seafood industry came from, it was really inspired by a couple people. Art Daniels, who's a skipjack captain, or was a skipjack captain on Deal Island. He was the first one who let me out to shoot pictures on a workboat. I went out dredging with him in the winter out of Deal Island. I connected with him through his grandson, Lee Daniels, who works for the state now, but my mom worked with Lee, so she kind of knew him, and that's how I got connected with Art. Went out with him multiple times on the skipjack, sail dredging, and you know, got to see that whole process, and I really became interested in seeing more of it. There's a lot of watermen who don't have kids that are in the business. You know, they've kind of encouraged their kids to do other jobs because of regulations, because of, you know, declining stocks in fish or crabs, oysters not declining so much, but increased cost of going out. Like, it's more and more expensive for people to go out, and the seafood prices, for whatever reason, like in the past 3 years, have gone down when costs have gone up. So the economics of the whole industry for the watermen, you know, people see the writing on the wall. It's just like, it's not sustainable from a business standpoint to go out when, you know, your product prices fluctuate so much, but your cost and operating increase.
Does that drive you as well, this idea that if I don't do this now, it may be lost to history?
Absolutely. And that's you know, that was how I felt about a lot of the things that were in my book, Island Life, even more so. I mean, Smith Island and Tangier Island have changed a lot since I started working on that book. I started shooting for that book in 2010. Before I really even knew I was working on the book, I shot a picture of the last house on Holland Island about 6 months before it went into the water.
Yeah, it's about 2010, right?
It was April of 2010 that I shot the picture. Then the house fell in October of 2010. So, I mean, that picture's become somewhat of a historical piece because it was like the last, like, I'm not going to say real picture, but it was the last time anybody went out there and like really like documented that house before it was completely gone.
To see that house and the waves literally crashing right at the foot of the doorway and that sort of thing, just about. You don't see that very often, first of all. But
fortunately.
Yeah, but it definitely gives you an appreciation for what the future might be, or some concern about the future.
I mean, the way I saw Holland Island is I saw it as foreshadowing for what could happen to Smith Island and what could happen to Tangier Island. Mm-hmm. So to me, Holland Island's like, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. It's like that island, and I mean, there's a lot of other islands in the bay that have disappeared or are disappearing. Mm-hmm. So it's not a new phenomenon, but the idea of having these active communities with a working seafood economy, still happening on them. The idea of those going away within our lifetimes is pretty scary, and I knew that I needed to document that.
Right, so Tangier and Smith Island, Tangier in Virginia, Smith in Maryland, are two islands that you can only get to by boat, but have been inhabited for hundreds of years, and obviously the seafood culture is endemic there, but the population is really having a hard time getting by.
Capturing that traditional way of life that is going away. I mean, when I first started going out to Smith Island in 2009, there were probably 30 crab scrapers out there. Now there's about 5 crab scrapers working. So that's a significant decline. But if you go back even further into the 70s, when Smith Island was like having its heyday, there were probably 150 to 200 crab scrapers working. And crab potters and peeler pounds, all kinds of stuff. Like there was just a lot more going on. There were a lot more people out there. The seafood industry was lucrative. People were making money. But now it's a harder place for people to work and to be watermen. And there's still crabs to catch. There's still money to be made in seafood. But Smith Island and Tangier are particularly challenging places because you've got all the product in the world right there, all the seafood that you could catch, but you don't have the market. Like it's not like the guys up here in Annapolis who are crabbing here. They can go to the restaurants. They can go to Cantler's. They can go to the Point Crab House. They can go to all these crab houses and sell direct.
Sell direct, right. What do you think the future, I mean, based on, you've been going out there for a decade, 2 decades now, what do you see happening with Tangier and Smith, if I can lump them together?
Well, Tangier is a little bit different than Smith Island just in terms of the landscape. Tangier has very little like marsh that's basically acting as a buffer to protect the community on the island. So Tangier is really in pretty immediate danger from erosion, from like a catastrophic hurricane wiping the whole place out. I mean, Tangier is in trouble. Like certain parts, there's really only one jetty on the island that's protecting the western side. But
near the airport.
Near the airport, exactly. That was built in like
70s.
And that's a mile-long jetty that's pretty much stopped the erosion of that western portion of the island. If you look at like the northern end of Tangier, it's eroding at like 15 feet a year in some spots. I mean, it's washing away quick. Like if you look at a map of Tangier, it's a little teeny speck of land in the middle of the bay. Like it's open water all the way to Reedville, Pocomoke Sound to Crisfield. It's a lot of territory. People on the islands would agree too that like they're one storm away from getting like wiped out. It could wipe out all the crab shanties, could wipe out people's workboats, and I think once you have an event like that, then people are going to realize like, hey, we don't want to move, we don't want to leave our island, but we're going to have to.
I'm not expecting you to be the spokesman for the entire waterman culture, but what do you think, is there anything we, society, can do to, well, frankly, to help the situation out there?
Buy local seafood.
Yeah.
And ask where your seafood's coming from. If you go out to eat and get a crab cake in this region, I would say there's a fair chance that it's not local crab meat. Even if you're getting a quote-unquote Maryland-style crab meat or a Maryland or crab cake or a Maryland crab cake, always ask where the crab meat's coming from. I mean, I think as an individual, that's what you can do to support the seafood industry, is buy local seafood.
Yeah.
And just, like oysters, for instance, this year, there was very little demand for oysters during the 2023-2024 season.
How's the progress with the cleanup seem to be going to you, just visually?
I mean, we have good years and bad years.
Yeah.
Recently, it's been kind of, since like 20 up to 2018, between like 2015 and 2018, we had really beautiful water clarity, water quality, a lot of grass. But after 2018, we had like torrential rains in the summer of 2018 and just sent a ton of crap coming down the Susquehanna River. That seemed to be a little bit of a turning point within my lifetime.
Yeah. But
certain areas of the bay seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, I was up on a boat in the Susquehanna Flats, and it was chocolate milk up there.
Yeah.
2018's fall, big logs in the water and everything. You think that's still reverberating then?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Or it did for a while.
I think it did for a while. I think we've got a lot of issues now with stuff like blue catfish.
Yeah.
Blue catfish are going to be a major issue in the next decade, especially in Maryland. Virginia's a little slower to recognize how detrimental these catfish are to the native ecosystem and the food web in the Chesapeake Bay. But I can personally tell you that I've seen catfish with crabs in them, clams in them. I mean, they're just devouring all these different native species, and we've seen a lot of declines in like striped bass young of the year recruitment. So that young of the year survey that Maryland does every year, like in the spawning rivers, we've seen that drop consistently. And it's the same spots where these blue catfish hang out, is where DNR does their surveys.
We're coming up on a very big year, 2025, where the current Bay Agreement expires, and we either continue doing what we're doing or find a new way forward with how they pursue restoring the bay and the tributaries and all that. Do you have any advice?
I think a lot of emphasis needs to be put on these blue catfish. I think we spend a lot of effort and money on these projects that really have no tangible deliverable, so to speak. Like, there's nothing that can say, oh, look what we've done. Like, it's all like fluff in a sense. But if you had some sort of suppression program, like what I did in Yellowstone with the lake trout, where you could go and say, look, we killed 2 million blue catfish. And you could kind of extrapolate and say, well, that's 2 million blue catfish. We may have saved 20 million crabs and however many amount of rockfish or something like that. But it's like these blue catfish, and I've got pictures that I can share with you for the online portion of this. I've got pictures of stomach contents of blue catfish that are kind of disturbing as to what they're eating. It's like, I mean, they're eating all kinds of stuff. And you could ask somebody like Noah Bresnahan, who does research in the Nanticoke River. He'll tell you
found a whole duck.
They'll eat ducks, they'll eat muskrats, they'll eat turtles, they'll eat anything that they can get their mouth around, which isn't much limitation because they grow to like 100 pounds.
Question like picking your favorite child. I love it when I get to go out in the field, and it sounds like you get to do a lot more of it. Have you had one of those moments where you're just like, I got into the right business here?
I mean, all the time, every time.
That's great.
Every time I'm out on the water and can watch the sun come up, I consider myself fortunate. When I'm out on the water on Monday, and I think about all the people I know who have to sit in an office and work in an office, then yeah, I mean, I know that I picked the right path for myself.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at BayJournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.